Hello everyone. So we're going to be talking about reinforcement in terms of positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, and when you would likely to use those reinforcers during ABA therapy. So first we're going to talk about positive reinforcement, and positive reinforcement can be used for a variety of different areas in ABA, but for this one in particular, we're going to use it with DTT, which is discrete trial training. As for negative reinforcement, we're going to use an example of negative reinforcement with FCT. FCT is functional communication training, and this is something else you will likely encounter implementing during ABA therapy. Let's first talk about what positive reinforcement is and what negative reinforcement is. So positive reinforcement is when the behavior occurs and the stimulus is added into the environment as a consequence. And so that will likely increase the frequency of that behavior to reoccur. For negative reinforcement, what happens is that there's a stimulus in the environment and the behavior occurs, and then that stimulus is removed as the consequence. So stimulus is removed, but the behavior, the frequency of it, is likely to reoccur in the future and increase in the future. We're going to practice positive reinforcement using DTT, which is discrete trial training. This is something you'll be doing very often in ABA therapy, so it's really good to get that practice now to see the flow of what reinforcer you'll use, how quick you're going to present it, and then also just, the flow of the DTT trial. So first, let's talk about the steps for a positive reinforcement with DTT. So step 1, you determine the preferred reinforcer for the trial. This is something you'll start being, more versed with when you work with the child. You'll know, okay, do they like dolls? Do they like the iPad? Do they like Play-Doh? You'll understand what they want to work for. So keep that in mind. Once you determine what that reinforcer is, such as Play-Doh, just keep it out of sight. So you determine the reinforcer, you keep it out of sight, and then you're going to present the SD. So, for example, let's say the trial is something very simple. What's your name? So present the SD, what's your name, and then you are going to wait for their response. And I'll just do it again. So the therapist say, what's your name? And client will say, Jacob. What you'll do next is you're going to present the reinforcement because they got it correct. So you can do praise, but a lot of times we'll do praise plus a reinforcer, object reinforcer, and we'll say, that's right, your name's Jacob, and you'll give them the preferred item, such as the Play-Doh. And remember, this has to be quick, so also the DTT trial will also be quick. So ideally it'll be something like you'll be playing and then remove the objects and say, what's your name? Jacob. Great, that's right, your name is Jacob. Here you go, here's some more Play-Doh. So something like that. So now let's also talk about negative reinforcement. So negative reinforcement is not something you would do with DTT trials, so we're going to use FCT, which is functional communication training. What that looks like is you are going to notice a situation that is aversive to the child. Ideally, you'll be more familiar with them. It could be something as you can tell when they are sitting at the table too long. Maybe it's they don't like the activity you're doing. And you can also use that knowledge for your advantage. So if there's an activity they really don't like, present it, wait for their response, which is going to be a problem behavior, because that's the whole point of FCT is usually they're engaged in a problem behavior and you're just correcting them with, training a man to replace it. So they're going to maybe start crying, or they might try to leave the table. And whatever you do, try to either block that escape or just, say, let's say it's escape. You can say, I want a break. And the child will say, I want a break. And you're going to let access to that break because that's a negative reinforcement. So you have the stimulus, the child behaves, you take away that stimulus, and that behavior, which is demanding, likely will increase in the future because that's what they want to do. They want to escape, but you're teaching it in a more functional way. So again, you're going to immediately allow access, and it's going to be the same as a positive reinforcement. Just make sure that it's quick, so a very quick immediacy to the reinforcement. You don't want to delay it. The longer the delay occurs, the more likely a behavior can occur between that, and the child may think that that behavior is what reinforced them. For example, if the child wants to take a break and instead they're crying and the therapist says, "I need a break," and the child says, "I need a break," and then the therapist just sat there for whatever reason waiting, and maybe the child might start crying a little longer, and then the therapist will say, "Okay, yeah, take a break." They might think that that crying was because it was the access to the break. So you just really want to make sure that they know that the demand is contingent on the break. And there's a lot of other ones you can do too, such as presenting an item that they don't like, and they could say, "I don't want that." So you're just teaching them the demand so that they won't display problem behavior, that they're going to display manding, and that you're going to be able to increase that manding through the use of the negative reinforcement contingent on that. So right now is the opportunity to ask as much questions as you'd like. I will answer them to the best of my ability. After we have questions, we're going to split up into pairs, and we are going to practice these reinforcement procedures. So I'll have 3 separate DTT trials, and I have them written on the forms of what you'll be saying, and I have 3 separate examples of negative reinforcement with FCT. So we're going to practice that with our pairings for about 10 minutes, and we are then going to demonstrate in front of the class, where we will provide some feedback, both positive and constructive, and we will go from there. So thank you, everyone, and again, let me know if you have questions.